Hello, everyone. Welcome to season 3 of the Recording Drums podcast. It's back after a long hiatus. It's going to come a little more randomly in spurts, but I am excited to start doing this again and talking to drummers that really inspire me and record from home. Gotten a lot of great feedback over the past 2 seasons from just everything that people are learning through being able to hear all these drummers talk about recording in their home studios. I've started a coaching business for recording drums. So if you are a recording drummer and you're looking to improve your sounds to build your studio business from your home, you can go to blairsinta.com. There's a video there that explains about the coaching. You can also check out some testimonials. If it's something that intrigues you, you can book a free call with me. We'll talk about the challenges and goals in your studio. And from there, we'll see if it's a good fit for us to work together and get you on your way to your goals. In this episode, enjoy Shawn Pelton, drummer for SNL for over 30 years, has recorded with tons of classic artists from Sheryl Crow to Bruce Springsteen to the Brecker Brothers to all kinds of singer-songwriter stuff, you name it. He's been doing this in his home studio since 2005. He was recording in the big studios in New York in the 90s, so he understood the transition. He saw the transition. He got on the game early, and he's one of the few people I know that's still in Manhattan recording in a home studio, and of course, he's just a legendary player. All right, enjoy Shawn Pelton.
Damn, you working today?
Man, had this thing last night that was a long ass day. The Songwriters Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's a crazy gig, you're there at 9 a.m. and then it goes to like 12:30 a.m., one of those like multi-artist crazy days. And so it was long day yesterday. Yeah.
Okay. How was it?
It was cool. Man, I've been so lucky. I've done this gig for like about 20 years now, and it used to be one of those things Phil Ramone ran, and it's one of those house band kind of things. And but there's been some great moments on that gig. Like Stevie Wonder would be there, or it's interesting. It's like sort of it's the songwriter angle of it. So it's a little bit different slant than the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but always really interesting in the stories of, the people that have written songs, but sometimes aren't really the artist, and vice versa.
Oh,
They give an award to people who are sort of voices of songs, but maybe not writers. So like they cover a lot of ground, and there's
interesting.
The publishing industry is there, and it was maybe telecast long time ago, like on public television or something, but it's sort of this inside kind of, feels like an inside publishing industry sort of hang, it's in Midtown at the one of the ballrooms at the Marriott Marquis.
Oh wow, a vibeless spot.
But it's fun, it's been a lot of great nights or moments. It's been cool. Yeah,
man, that's deep to be in there with some people like that, right?
Yeah, like one month we was talking about Stevie Wonder, like he showed up, and maybe this was like a tribute to Berry Gordy or something like that, and they wanted to do My Cherie Amour, I think, and we were sent sort of a recent live version of him doing it with the band.
Okay.
And then he's like, no, I want to do it more like the original or something. He's like, drummer, he goes, what's your name? I said, Shawn. He said, okay, so look, pick up a brush with your right hand and stick with your left hand, and here's the pattern. And he sings out the the whole thing, and it's like, it's so fun, like stuff like that,
Yeah, man, that's a lot of concentration for a long day, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you're like it's like your focus is laser for like 10 hours or whatever, right?
I know there's so much to keep track of, like like Gloria Estefan was on this thing last night, and it was a huge medley of all her stuff, and we get sent kind of a chopped up together thing that they want to try to put together, and then keeping track of the tempos and the way it segues from one thing to a next, and like following her vocal pickup, which she sort of did different when we actually were doing it. And it was, like, there's just, man, there's a lot of it's a lot of homework involved in those kind of things, and then also flying by the seat of your pants. And
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
but do you feel pretty comfortable? I mean, I know that with SNL, you've been doing it so long. Do you still have like that edginess? Like I know what you're talking about because I've done gigs like that. But there's a certain you're just like on. You're like, okay, cool, yeah, blah blah blah. But are you like? I feel like you've played in so many big ball games that like you're kind of
yeah.
like cool, yeah,
Well, man, I guess I have seen a lot of stuff go down in those kind of situations just by being a part of a lot of those, like you're saying. And I think living through it does help, maybe making you feel like. But as long as, man, as long as I have enough time to sort of do the homework and sort things out, uh, I feel good. But it helps. It helps when we're handed like, the materials to sort of set yourself up to do good. Like if we know that referencing like live YouTube videos from a tour they just did is really what, as opposed to like sometimes you get sent the original records and you go down a rabbit hole with that, but then come to find out it's not at all what they want to do.
yeah. So right, the comfort factor of the live YouTube thing, we're like, this is what they expect, and I
Yeah,
don't have to think of my own hybrid version of what might happen, like left or right, right?
right. That's it, man. That whole YouTube thing is really a gift in those situations, as far as like, okay, yeah. So the record from 1968 was about that,
Yeah,
but really about it. Or no, they don't want to do what they're doing live. They want to go back to what was happening on the original record. Or, just those kind of clues, man, are just really that stuff is really helpful for auditions and all sorts of stuff.
yeah, that shit's crazy. When I started playing with Melissa Etheridge, like in 2010, at that point she had already had like a 25-year recording career, and the production values were like so many different things, and I was like, what, like what do we do with this, you know what I mean? Like in the
Yeah,
end it was super easy, but like when you're sorting through that shit and you're like, okay, like
yeah, yeah.
do we need to be firing off loops? Do we need, or do we have to cover this percussion thing, or are we just rock and roll? Like what are we doing?
Right. No, I love that. There's so much so many balls in the air to deal with.
Yeah.
Man, I've been so lucky with this. Another one of these big kind of shows is this thing at the Beacon. It's this Love Rocks like kind of thing, and Melissa was on it just
Oh yeah.
recently.
Okay.
And, but it's double drumming with Steve Gadd. And like, so man,
Mention that in the email, dude. That is insane.
it's been like 6 or 7 years of this like, huge show, and getting to hang and play with Steve for like, 5 days leading up to it and stuff. And it's just been like, man, such a blessing to be, he's one of those people that you just learn so much being around his airspace,
Right.
and like the way he communicates, and then just his sound and his touch, and being, it's so rare for drummers to actually ever get to work together,
Yeah.
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it's interesting being around someone like him and how he navigates all that stuff too, and learning from it.
Is he kind of a take charge? Like I've been down this road 1,000 times, kind of.
Man, he's not. It's interesting. I mean, he's take charge, and I mean, he's very confident, in a great
Yeah,
situation.
not like as an alpha male, but just as like the experience. Just
Well, yeah, the experience side of it is really interesting, and more from the side of like listening and taking things in, as opposed to, like, sometimes like an unexperienced person might ask a lot of questions, and just about like, but more like hanging back, taking it all in, and using your instincts to address the situation. But man, this thing about the taking charge thing is interesting with two drummers, like, because there's a situation with drums where, you know, the drummer needs to definitely take charge, and then, but with him, he's like really open about like, the two voices together, and like, he'll be into like, we'll orchestrate drum fills together, and like, he loves the power of like us nailing something together, and stuff like that. So there might be something like once like Robert Plant was on the show, and or maybe it was with Hart, we did some kind of like Zeppelin tune, and it's a one of those busy bass drum parts, and so the idea of like I let him like carry the the busy right foot thing, and
Right.
simplifying but it's just interesting, two guys working together and when to leave space and when to like nail things together, and but man, what a
And-
great cat, it's so soulful and his touch and just
Yeah.
like big picture with the music,
Yeah.
and it's been great.
That's amazing. And it's also fascinating because, like, especially in a situation like that, two drummers, of course he's like one of the most musical cats, right? So he's gonna be musical, but at the same time, it doesn't always mean that a drummer is gonna understand how to work with another drummer. It's such a different fucking thing, you know?
Yeah.
Um
I know. And it's interesting, like I guess, back in the day with Stuff, like him and Chris Parker played a lot together. And then I think there's also this period in the 70s where him and Rick Marotta did a lot of double drums on some stuff here in New York, John Capé. And anyway, the two of those together, guys, so you're right. It takes a different headspace, and really giving, and
yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So man, okay, so as far as I know, you built this place around 2005
I
ish.
think so. Yeah, something like that. We it's amazing, this journey of this trying to do this in New York City, and it's man,
I
it's
mean, you're like the only one, as far as I know, man. You're the only one left. I think you're the only drummer. You and maybe Steve Wolf are the only drummers in New York City, right?
no, there's kids doing it, and out in Brooklyn, and there has been like sort of a, the home studio recording revolution thing, it's really opened, and it's amazing what you can get done in a spare closet almost, like you can really make a lot of magic happen in humble spaces,
Yeah.
And so anyway, this building that I'm in is called, like in New York, there's pre-war buildings and post-war. And the idea of like after World War II, the building code, like, the ceilings weren't as high, the materials that they built apartments with like weren't as robust as like if they were doing it in 1920, like these classic structures on the Upper West Side that were done, with huge ceilings and stuff like that. So this is a post-war building, long story longer here.
Okay. Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot of ceiling height, and people told me, like, man, I was hoping to float a room in a room. So this is sort of like a spare bedroom.
Okay.
And they're like, well, you can try it, but I don't think it's going to work. This might be just a disaster, And then I was like, well, shit, I want to try it. And even if it's just me, like, messing around. So I had a lot of mixed input about even trying to pull it off. And I hired one acoustician, like developer guy, to come over, and they were pretty draconian about like there's a window here that has outside light, and they wanted to close all this down, an event that just came through a small hole, and like, the room within a room and floated. But I still wanted light to come in and all this. So, I made some compromises, but basically this is like a floated room on pucks, and then with a little insulation. And then there's like 7 or 8 layers of shit that the floor is. It's like, homosode, and then insulation vinyl, and then another layer of homosode, and then plyboard, and then something else. But like this idea that all these different layers and materials are supposed to chop down the vibration ability, and all this.
Yeah.
Then, so we built a room, and then it's just a trip that the devil's in the details. So like, even if one nail or one stud is contacting the outside room, like then you have some kind of like vibrational, transference. And like the hardest thing has been the low end. So, like when you walk by a club and you still hear like boom, boom, like a house music thing or something like that. So the low end thing, this idea of this dream of being able to have something that was totally soundproof, it more is like this idea of sound reduction, and taking it down, maybe chopping out 75% of what's happening. And the low end still goes down below, and it's kind of an issue. And so then what I ended up doing is the drums are on another industrial riser. So there's the floated room in a room. Then there's this industrial riser that's on these heavy ass springs. So like if there was a, you know, if you're at Con Ed and there's some kind of electrical thing that's like, like they put it on this industrial riser thing, right? So the idea was to float the drums on this other riser on top of the floated room, and that maybe that would help make the low end not be as heavy with the thing,
Was that secondary to after you built the room?
Yeah. So that was like, oh shit, people are sort of complaining.
Yeah.
Bummer. And so let me try that.
Yeah.
So then the next move was interesting. Like it sort of helped a little bit, but I think what I started to learn with this crazy journey was it was never going to be this soundproof, like, soundproof thing. And it was going to be more about controlling the volume. So I hired this guy to come over downstairs and like with an acoustician wand, like he is like measuring the sound while I was playing, to see like, well, how bad is this down there? And then the trippy thing about New York City sound ordinances is that even if you took the wand and put it out the window, like I'm up on the 10th floor, like just the street noise and like the air conditioners in the buildings that like that goes above like sound ordinance. So it's like, like the noise code in New York is so trippy.
Yeah.
So then long story, even longer. So I ended up calling like the musicians union and I was trying to understand, well, like because they have like a lawyer there, and like what's the legal rights and all this. And what's interesting about New York City is that like in the 60s, I don't know if it was Albert Ayler or it was some like crazy free jazz type thing, like Pharaoh Sanders, like won a lawsuit where he would set up his group and just freak out in his apartment, I guess. It was loud and shit and people were complaining, but he actually won the case because he has a legal right to sort of rehearse and make music or do his thing,
Wow.
So the union has this thing like where the legal precedent with all this is that, let's say you're a lead trumpet player on Broadway or something, you're actually allowed to practice your craft. But where it gets tricky is that if you're doing something for commerce, so like you can't teach trumpet there, or like,
wow,
so
really?
Yeah. So like you can practice drums, but like, if they knew that tracks were being done or stuff like that, I think that's where it gets to be a slippery slope.
Yep.
And because then it's more about zoning for commercial zoning versus like your private thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, all apartments sort of had building hours where like, between 8 a.m. and maybe, 10 p.m., you're sort of allowed to get down.
Yep.
But you can't do it at like 3 a.m. Right. And then I never try to push it late. And I think it's actually okay. I don't get a ton of complaints. And but I also try to be like, I have another kit that's like got the little mesh heads and I can practice on that. So I'm not like wailing away 8 hours a day on a kit, like I'm kind of like when I have to track, I can track and, hopefully I'm not blowing their brains out. But well, long story longer is that, ultimately it's turned out great and I've been able to get great results and do things and, so there's been stuff like where, something's been like a bit of an Avatar or Power Station or like, these world-class studios. And then they'll go and they'll want to recut a track because they, changed the arrangement and then they ran out of money. They can't go back to the. And then, the tracks that are done in a space like this and mixed with somebody that kind of knows what they're doing. I mean, it's in context, there's, so even if you were doing this in a garage somewhere, like, the message that I'm finding is that, man, you can get great results with like even all your great stuff that you've done on YouTube where, you take one mic, get like all these different sounds and all the different things that you've shown, which is amazing, by the way.
Yeah.
I love,
I can't believe you've seen that shit, but thank you. Yeah.
Oh, no, man. The content that you posted is really inspiring, in that way where I love the message of like, you don't have to have a Neve console to get great results. Like if like I've hired a lot of like, there's great engineers, in town and I've hired them to come over and help me get set up and like, well, should I do this? Do I need this? Do I really need this? And it's just interesting how, I really think the message can be that you can really get great results with not spending a ton of bread on gear, you know. And anyway, so
It's crazy though, right? I mean, there's so many options now, right? Like like in 2005, there was a lot less because it was either like really expensive shit or cheap shit, right?
yeah,
Like the middle road has like really opened up now,
yeah.
which
Yeah,
is
and it's wild with gear, you know, sometimes I feel like, you know, so like I have some API stuff, and then I feel like when someone walks in that's a gear hound, like if they see stuff they recognize, or you know, like a set of Coles overheads, they're into ribbon mics, let's say. Like if they see stuff like that, you can tell that that makes them feel comfortable.
right.
But even as the years have passed, like I think people are seeing that cats are getting good results, and man, it's about the musician, the part, the playing.
Yeah.
And you know, there is an art to getting a great sound. I don't want to diminish all of that, but I really feel like the message should be that you can make it happen on limited gear. It doesn't have to be the, you know, $30,000 worth of Neumann mics.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that's great too, but
It is great. You're right. No,
yeah.
that's great too.
But yeah, it's like the touch. You know the shit out of that room by now. It's almost 20 years.
Yeah, yeah.
You know how to, do it. How did you know? Like, what was the thing in 2005? Did you see this coming, or like, what was the inspiration behind like?
Yeah, it definitely felt like, well, like New York has gone through so much, like the studio business in New York, you know, is such a shell of what it used to be. Like there's hardly any rooms left. And you know, but out in Brooklyn, different places, a lot of things are springing up and so much great work's being done. But like, man, when I first moved here in the late 80s, it was a complete vibe of this, that if you didn't do it at Hit Factory, or if it wasn't done at Power Station, or blah 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 blah, it was never going to be considered anything more than sort of a good demo or something. Like, you know, the major labels had this thing, and artists felt like, oh well, I've got to go do it at the Hit Factory, or blah 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 blah, you know. And it's so fascinating how that's evolved to now, where, you know, like Billie Eilish and her brother are winning Grammys out of their bedroom, you know, and they could have probably gone out and cut some great live drums with a minimal setup in the garage if they wanted to go that direction, you know. Yeah. And so I think it's really liberating that that has happened, and that everybody can feel empowered, that there isn't this threshold where if I don't go and drop, you know, 2K a day at a major studio to cut my demo, it's not going to really be, you know. So it felt like the writing was on the wall with that. And then, you know, like New York, the hip hop thing got so huge that a lot of the studios and the maintenance at places, like, you know, you'd show up and they were so used to doing rap records and an MPC and somebody rapping, you know, which is all great. But then when it came to like cutting a live band, like, you know, the tie lines weren't working, and this, you know, it was just interesting how the maintenance thing with studios in New York started to decline, and
yeah.
So yeah, it felt like the writing was been on the wall for that for a while now, you know. So I feel fortunate to have a place, you know, and lucky. And
so you thought back then, you're like, this would be a good idea. I mean, because even like, so I had a house, like I'm in Glendale now, but I had a house in Burbank, and I kind of, you know, I wanted a garage. Obviously, LA being very different than New York space wise, but I wanted a garage where I could like practice.
Yeah.
And I had been kind of sort of buying some recording gear, getting inspired, but I never thought it would be a full on thing, right? But I feel like it's even a bigger stretch in New York City, where conceptually you were like, okay, I'm going to have to be able to do this in fucking Manhattan. You know what I mean? Like, you know?
Yeah. And I feel really lucky about, you know, trying to roll the dice about doing it at my space and trying to, you know, where I can roll out of bed and go right into it, because,
yeah,
you know, there were cats that had like separate rooms or separate spaces, you know, and then, man, it's like the rent thing and the overhead of another space. And I mean, it's really hard from a dollars and cents wise to make it all work out, and to have enough work come through, you know, month after month after month to right. for a separate space, you know.
Right.
So it's interesting. Yeah, it's very hard to pull off, man. And it's and floating the room. And it was a construction, and it was a big thing.
But obviously you felt in your gut like this is the move, and this is going to keep me working.
Yeah, it felt like with seeing all the big rooms close and stuff like that, it was smart to pull it together. Yeah.
Wow. And then, okay, so where was your engineering when you started to do this? Were you knowledgeable, or were you like, okay, I'm just diving in, I'm gonna figure this out?
I sort of just dived in and tried to eat up as much as I could by reading and look. There's so much you can learn on YouTube.
Not in 2005 though.
Right. No, good point. So I did hire some of my friends that I've worked with that were engineers. Like Kevin Killen's come over, Stuart Lerman. Anyway, a lot of like engineers here in New York that I've worked with. I had them come over and help me out and say, is this a total disaster, or is it going to work? What do you suggest I should do? And they were all pretty giving and empowering about, no, man, you can make this happen. And talked about like phase and relationships and different things like that. But, it was kind of like they encouraged a lot of experimenting, and that, so man, it felt really empowering having like world-class people come over to sort of a humble setup and say, no, this is cool. It's going to work,
Right.
And the idea of also like implying like a bigger space, like, this isn't the biggest room.
Mm-hmm.
So if it needed to sound like a bigger space, the convolution reverb thing and all that around, and like you can make any kind of space that feels like come together now. It used to be like, oh, the room sound, da 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 da. That was so great. And it is great in these classic recordings, but it's fascinating how you can tailor almost any physical space, in a home setup these days.
It's insane now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like almost any classic studio, you can just throw the plug-in on, and it's like,
right. I mean, that's incredible. Like, that was not in the discussion 20 years.
Not even. I don't know. What, 8 years ago? Not even. Right. Like, yeah. Like today, I'm gonna be at Ocean Way. Tomorrow, I'm gonna be at Sunset Sound. Like, it's bonkers, man.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. So how long till like you feel like work started to transition to come to you once you got this going? Like, you're like, hey, I got this space, and you got people to trust, that like what's coming out of there is going to be good. Besides, obviously, you're playing, touch, things like that, right?
Yeah. I think it kind of, I mean, I'm fortunate that I knew a lot of people, and then they started doing things at home and like, hey man, can you put live drums on this? And we would try it. And then, there sort of was this snowball effect, and not just like from what I was doing with the people I knew, but like, I think everybody started to realize like, oh, holy shit, this can come together in a home studio recording situation. And, it's interesting, the different, like, the communication about all this stuff. Like, some people feel like that everybody has to be in the room at the same time, and there can be like tremendous benefits to that, obviously. But, if you have a lot of experience, there's ways to sort of imply that you're all in the room together, just how you react to what maybe you're being sent and all that kind of stuff. So, it was just fortunate. I had like, work over at SNL, so we were doing some stuff for that. And then like the 30 Rock theme, we did it somewhere else, but then they made a record of it, and then we recut some of that here for the record. And then there were other things that happened. Like, I think I did a track for Roseanne Cash maybe, and then different artists, and then that would like, oh wow. So if something happened there that was on a real record, I guess it's gonna be okay. Or like, it's just interesting,
the legitimacy of it. Like,
right. So that kind of helped, and but it's just amazing how people are really open to taking drums from a home recording setup these days and taking it seriously, where it used to be, I think, oh, I'm not sure. Oh, he did that in his basement, you know.
Yeah.
But man, I think everybody has this realization that it can work now and be world class, you know. If you know
I
what
mean,
you
now I feel like it's almost expected.
Yeah.
I mean, almost everybody actually is expected, you know, but I feel like almost drummers especially. Like if you don't have something, it's almost like, well, where are we gonna do this? You know, if we can't do it at
Right.
your house, you know.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, man. It's like now the discussion is like, oh, so are you set up to record? So we can just do it at your place, right? And then
Right.
if someone that isn't, it's like, oh shit, oh no, we got to go to a real place, you know.
Yeah.
Or it used to be the other way around.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, do you have so now is it almost a given? Are you is it kind of a given for you that you're going to record at home, or how much is there discussion? Is it like there's certain clientele no matter what you're going to do it at home, or is there still a push to try to go somewhere, you know?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the person and the artist and what they're comfortable with. So all that's just different depending on the thing. You know, like there's one producer that you know, we're talking about Roseanne Cash. So John Leventhal has his own setup in his basement, you know, and
Okay.
he's got a set of drums over there, and you can tell that he's in love with what he's got going on with his signal chain and his sound that he gets there, and he's really comfortable with that. So to sort of get in the way of that, you know, it's not really going to go. And and then maybe there's some old school people that still feel like they need to do it in a room with everybody at the same time, and then that's their process, you know. And so um I do feel like that from an experience standpoint, that, you know, there is a way to make something seem organic even if you're not in the room at the same time, just by the way you maybe approach something or react to things or that, you know. So I'm not anti, you know, that home recording is sort of a step down. Like I think it all can work, and it's just there's no rules. It's a trip how with all of this like flexibility, and everybody has different feelings about it, you know, and sort of being open to all of that and
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. Do you have other cats come over, like bass players come over and track with you ever, or even?
Yeah, sometimes I've set up that I can do that, and I have done that. Yeah, yeah. Uh, but you know, a lot of times people now are just used to like being sent the thing and doing it. But yeah, I am set up where I can do a small rhythm section.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've said this probably a handful of times doing this podcast now, where like I'm a little bit tired of playing music by myself out here,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's just such a weird thing, because if somebody wants me to go somewhere, and especially budget wise, it makes way more sense to do it here sonically, because I got everything that you could possibly want, right? Oh, we're going to go in that direction. Cool.
Yeah, yeah.
X amount of bass drums, snare drums, percussion, whatever. But if you want to go somewhere, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to bring one kit and 5 snares and a handful of cymbals and some percussion. And that's the limitation, which is cool, you know. And I would much rather go play with people in a room, even if it's just a bass player. But the palette now, unless there's a budget to bring all this, it's like it's this weird dynamic, you know.
No, man, that's such a good point, and that's so interesting about like, you know, the way that's evolved in town or I guess anywhere. It's just the whole thing about cartage,
Yeah.
and what used to be in budgets about like, you know, bringing in a couple kits maybe or something, or maybe just, you know, like all of that. And then New York is so interesting because a lot of the studios have house kits and maybe 2 or 3. And so it's kind of like, all right, well, can we make this work and just bring some snares and cymbals in, and probably, you know, or is the person like, there's some people that they have to see a round badge Gretsch kit there, or they feel like, you know, so there's some like there's visual element of thing, or if it's not, you know, a Ludwig kit from 1970, it's then you know, so that's interesting too about like the different levels of what's happening with that, you know. And but you're right, man, the percussion side of things, like if it's going to go and have that involved, and the creative colors of the percussion thing, it's wild how the stories of like in Los Angeles, what was it? Emil Richards, was that his name? The famous percussion guy?
Yeah, Emil Richards. Yeah.
Emil Richards, yeah. But like showing up for like, a film date and having just case after case of all this great percussion stuff,
Yeah.
And then now with all these sample libraries, like there was this one that's called like Hollywood Percussion or something, and then like, it's these amazing libraries of all this shit multi-sample. And that's kind of like, as a percussionist, you could in a way show up. I mean, you're not going to have the dynamic control of real instruments and all that, but the argument of like showing up with a hard drive and your laptop and a controller.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's fascinating, like how that's evolved,
Yeah.
So yeah, I love what you're bringing up. That in New York, the whole thing about when there used to be dates, there was a big cartage thing that would be involved if you were bringing your own stuff in.
Yeah.
And then there's also a psychology in New York, though, because there's so many house kids. It would be like showing up with, a snare and some cymbals. And like maybe I was listening to a Rick Marotta thing, and then Gadd used to talk about this too, about back in the day in the 70s, it was a lot of house kids. And then Gadd said he'd show up with the superphonic, Ludwig, and have another one just in case the superphonic broke. It wasn't like, let me bring a wood shell drum in, or I need to have a deeper size. I mean, I'm sure he has all that. But back in the day, he was talking about, throwing stuff in a cab and going from this studio to that studio and like maybe Rick Marotta was talking about they were dissecting Peg on one of the things, and he talked about the snare that he had and a cymbal bag or something, and just pulling it out of the cab and going up to where the house kit was, and maybe the heads of the toms weren't that together or pitted out, and so that the track doesn't have any tom fills on it. But like, which is sort of indigenous to this New York thing of like house kits everywhere, and like, oh shit, well, what are we walking into, and what condition is it going to be in?
Right.
Which is kind of different than the cartage aspect of like, well, let me bring in my 2 kids or 3 kids or just the one. Or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah. God, that's funny to think about, because like when I think about like the 80s, and like you think about Gadd and his sound, right? And it's him, besides the touch and the licks, but it's him, right? Or you think about like Vinny in the 80s, or any of these, like, maybe they're more on the jazz side when I'm going through them in my head, but like that was like their sound, and you knew it,
Yeah.
But thinking about like house kits, like I always feel like it's interesting because the house kit thing finally happened in the past, I don't know, decade or something in LA, where, when I was living here, I moved here in 96. And like, when I was just hitting the clubs hard, I was always bringing my kit. Like, that's just what we do. You play the Viper Room, your shit's on the sidewalk. You got 10 minutes to set it up, and then they throw it back on the sidewalk. But playing in bands and stuff, I was like, well, that's like, if you're going to play in a band, you want to have your drum sound. Like, that's part of the band's sound. And that's you. And it always kind of bummed me out that like, then the house kit thing started to take over, and I was like, well, there's no personality in the house kit, except in the player. This is what's, I'm the long-winded point I'm trying to get is, I guess the house kit's always been there, and it's come more out of the player than the drums. But I feel like those signature sounds like that those guys were getting then were it's so homogenized now, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of guys, but like in the 80s, I don't know what the fuck I'm saying. I'm just kind of going back and forth about like,
man,
I thought it was one way, but maybe it never was. You know what I mean? Maybe they're just certain records that just stuck out in my head. You know what I mean? That like,
no, I love everything you're bringing up, and I think it's really interesting to look at. Like, so, like Stuart Copeland with the Police. I remember hearing stories about him having the kind of high pitched open toms and the thing, and that maybe the engineers said, hey man, this feels ringy and high pitched. Can we kind of bring it down? And then he was like, no man, kiss my ass, I'm good. And which I think is completely awesome. And then we have like this incredible personality and voice on the drums. Now, what's interesting though about this is that sort of the transparent thing that you're talking about is also interesting, where cats that have recorded a lot and fit into a million different sort of situations and have the flexibility to sort of, you know, if it's a roomy brush track, like a lot of times the artist and the songs dictate sounds too, you know, and I remember talking to Jerry Marotta about this for a second, and he's really creative and so amazing. And he usually goes left, you know, when he can.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, man, it's so like, you know, he used to play some with those dowse drums, the Indian skin tiles, or however you say it.
Yep.
And you know, I've seen him do it, and they like tune it with like, or you know, tune the skin head with like a lighter, or
Right.
It was like crazy, you know.
Yeah.
But it was so creative and it was so interesting, you know. And I remember just saying how I just thought it was so cool, that the sonic approach and stuff. And then he brought up the point that you actually, though, you have to be with an artist or in a situation where you even have the bandwidth to be allowed to do that. You know what I mean? So like on a straight ahead track where they're trying to maybe go down the middle or recreate something that doesn't have anything left field about it, it's just interesting the neutrality of coming into a house kit and then making that work too, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't even know what I'm saying really, except that
I
personality, you know, the personality aspect of what you're saying about, like, you know, a Stuart Copeland or a Keith Moon and all that, where they had their sound. Like, remember someone saying about Tony Williams that, you know, he had that big ass Gretsch kit. This maybe in the '80s, and like, because the whole thing about having a sound, I think, is so important. And they asked them and said, "Hey man, can we put some a blanket in your bass drum?" You know, he said, "No, fuck you." You know, this is my sound. You know, whereas like I remember reading an interview with Gadd where he talked about how engineers kind of liked those Evans hydraulic heads, and maybe that was before the pinstripe thing happened. You know, and then how he's like, yeah, you know, the engineers seem to like it and they control it, and you know, whatever would work for the. And I was just thinking about the flexibility of like that approach versus no, this is my sound and kiss my ass and this is what I'm doing, you know.
Yeah.
And then obviously though, but Gadd is very recognizable because this sound was so recorded, so you can recognize that kind of muted down pinstripe approach.
Yeah.
From that era, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm talking in circles too.
It's just, well, that's the thing that I got into too. It's like I think I'm like I hit that point. It's fascinating to me though that like the character of a certain player can come out regardless of the sound.
Yeah, I love that, because like when you go see Bernard Purdy play, for instance, in New York on a house kit, it's going to be transcendently magic.
Yeah,
whether it's the trashed out kit, maybe at the bitter end, or a high tuned jazz kit at Birdland, or whatever house kit he's stepping into.
Right.
You know, so I love what you're saying about that the drummer and the personality of him can speak through whatever kit's happening.
Yeah, because the sound is part of the style, except the style somehow can transcend sound. Which that's when you're a total motherfucker, right?
Yeah. But you know, we can argue it the other way, that, you know, like that Stuart Copeland sound with the Police and the way he tuned his drums really was a great artistic statement, and he stuck with it, and it was awesome. So I think it's wild. This can be discussed in circles.
Yes. There's no right answer. Yeah.
But I love what you just said about there's no right answer, because that's really interesting about what we do, you know, as drummers. And, you know, there's been times where I've tried to really make a statement sonically. Like here's a story about it. So there's this track I got to record with Springsteen, just a couple tracks, and it's on this box set thing that came out.
You don't have to act humble. That's fucking dope.
No. I'm not trying to not segue into dropping some names.
Yeah. Drop them.
But it's a great story because from this thing that we're talking about, because it's this ballad and happy, kind of this slow eighth note orientated ballad thing. And I had, you know, Remo used to make those snare drums with the conga top, you know. Okay. So I had one of those, and it was kind of muffled down, and then I had had these brush blasted combinations that I had made, and I was doing this sort of ghost notey Al Greeny kind of soulful. I love this part that I thought I was on.
Oh yeah, okay.
I thought, oh man, I just love this so much. God, and it was sort of different, and then Bruce gets out. I don't know, man. I think maybe just a cross stick on 2 and 4, And I was like, oh, this is breaking my heart, And it's a chance to do this, and I just was so in love with this approach, which I thought was sort of creative and left field and all this. And then, man, I kept, hammering at it. And then finally I realized I really got to just let go and just, do what they want,
Yeah.
And then listening back to it when it finally was on this box set thing, just the cross stick and the space, and then sort of the lyric about the passing of time. And there was just a space around this thing that he was hearing,
Mm-hmm.
It made a lot of sense. Now, from a drummer standpoint, I still would have loved to have been like, well, that was different. That was really kind of a creative option. Wow. But man, they didn't want any of that. They wanted just this straight ahead thing,
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how I've had that happen more times than I can remember, right? You're like, okay, I got this new piece of gear. The shit's dope. This is gonna work, And and people are like, I don't know, man. It just they just want what they're comfortable with,
Well, and it's interesting, like what this gets into is a fascinating thing about control elements. Like, part of what we do, I think the ability to let go at some point is really helpful, because music means so much to all of us and our heart. And then you have like a passion for it, and you believe in your approach and your thing. And then, man, there can be a time where that really works. And then there's other times where it's like, man, maybe it's better to back off here. Like, so even with tracks, and like doing, because I've seen you do all this so great, like creatively, what you're doing sonically, with something maybe that's a little trashy or compressed or this, that, it's so great, and there's been times where, I'll try to give cats with my stems some of that, but, they may want to dial all that shit in themselves with the raw material that you give them, which is just interesting about, then it's like, once you track something, the ability to sort of be at peace with letting things go, instead of like, well, it comes out of what here, I really want to be proud of it. And sonically, I've come up with something that I love and you should love it too, versus like, no, man, we want to take the shit and treat it the way we're going to treat it, because we're going to mix it later. And we have the view of what else is going on this more than you do at this point, or, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, I think that's partly what I'm talking about with like working with people is, sometimes when I get a track that's really great and I get excited, and this is what always happens. It's like a newer artist or something. The budget is like nothing. And I get the song. I'm like, this is fucking great. And I end up spending 3 hours in my head, sound. So I'm going to add some programming, blah, 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 and you get it to a point like, okay, this is pretty dope. I'm going to send it off for the, like, hey, do you approve? And then it comes back and they're like, man, it's really cool. I think we were thinking more like this. And you're like, oh shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then, and I know that it's so, you come up with something that's so great and creative and like, you're really proud of it. And you're like, man, this is so new and fresh and so cool. And oh yeah, that is interesting. And then, being able to back away and trying to see it through their eyes and like, it's really that's a real great though instinct for people that do what we do. I think is this ability to, go all in on your sense of vision, but then also be able to step back and let go and like, man, no, they don't want that. They just want some pedestrian middle of the road thing, maybe.
Yeah.
And
it's
then
not personal, and it's
right.
You got to let go of that.
Yeah.
And that takes a long time sometimes, career wise or experience wise.
Yeah, experience wise, you're right. It's huge because, if you fight the battle enough and then see that sometimes it, maybe it's a grand slam, and then other times it's like, you could almost get, it's interesting. I've seen musicians, you know, not get hired for certain situations because they bring too much baggage in that way. And then other times I've seen people get hired because they have such a strong stance and sense of vision in that way.
Right. Right.
So it's interesting how, if you can have an instinct for who you're working for and who's producing and they want this from you. Like I remember doing this thing with David Byrne, and you were talking about like bringing programming to the table and all this, and this was right when Ableton first came out, and I just thought, I'd been using Acid, and then Acid sort of pee-peed on itself, and then Ableton, and I just thought this program was so powerful with what you could do with raw material and mixing it with the drums and all the programming stuff you're talking about. Yeah. And and the guy that was producing the record was sort of a hip-hop orientated producer, and I think he liked some of that, but it also got into this realm where it was maybe stepping on his planet, and then I was really passionate about, oh man, this is an interesting idea. Oh, we try this one. David, check this out. And then it was like, trying to understand that, like, well, maybe 50% less of that, and sort of understanding I was really hired to play drums and not bring this other shit to the table, but it also seems so new and exciting and creative, and
it's David Byrne, so
right.
I mean, you want to bring the creativity, right?
Yeah. No, amen. Yeah. So, but it's just, I guess, another insightful story about what you're talking about, experience of, like, as a sideman, when we get called, like, I think knowing your lane, and could be really helpful.
So how deep are you going at home as far as like changing drums and mics and all this stuff out? I mean,
well, I'm sort of, my default is sort of way over mic'd. So meaning that, there's 3 sets of overheads that I am always printing, and
explain that, please.
Yeah, it's weird. So it's like the Coles, it's like the Coles ribbon thing.
Okay.
For people that, think nothing's good unless it's just ribbon mics,
And that's a spaced pair thing, or?
And I have that set up in the Glenn Johns kind of thing.
Okay, right. That makes sense.
And then I have a pair of the super high-end Earthworks Omni mics.
Okay.
So, and that's a whole nother feeling of that Omni pattern, kind of 360 thing.
Yep.
And then there's a pair of AKG 451s for sort of that brighter, crisper thing.
Okay.
So there's sort of 3 different options, and
414s or 450. 450.
The 451s, the pencil small.
Oh yeah,
pencil.
I'm sorry. Right. Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
And so the idea of that is that that hopefully they're all in phase, and that if people want the darker ribbon thing, they have that. If they want sort of these other something brighter, they have that option. Then the bass drum has like 3 different perspectives. It's got, like, there's a D112, but then Drumagog is in line with that.
Okay.
There's a Shure Beta 50, I'm not sure, something that's just really specifically for the attack of the bass drum.
Yep.
And I have it going through like those SSL plugins that were for drums. And then there's a Yamaha.
You're hitting a kick sample with Drumagog?
Well, with Drumagog, I have it there, and I can blend it in if I need it, or I have access to different if I want to blend it. But it's not 100% Drumagog, but there might be some of that in there.
But you're gonna send that almost on any track,
right? Well, so then let me just finish the whole.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So then, so I got then a sub kick. So there's 3 different bass drum things that hopefully then. I like this idea that they're getting. I mean, some people it can be overwhelming, and then I'll like blend it sort of how I hear it. But if some people love options, like, oh my God, that's great. Oh yeah, well, give me everything. And then other people are like, Jesus Christ, what is all this shit? Can you just give me like kick, snare, and 2 overheads and just So anyway, then there's like a ribbon room thing, and then there's a U47 in the room. But it's not like this is a big room, but no, I got. And then there's a PCM on the ceiling, and then there's a 451 on the hi-hat. There's I use the the 201, the Buyer 201. I think that's it on the snare, which is a little bit darker and warmer than the 57 maybe.
Yep.
But I have that on the top and the bottom. So, snare bottom, snare top.
Yep.
Then like, there's a Josephson sort of here that I treat a little bit with the compression thing.
Okay.
Then there's the sort of like the little mic that goes, in between the toms by the bass drum, the little trash mic or whatever people call that, that.
Yep.
So like, there's a lot of tracks going on.
That's
so then like, I can give people all this shit and they can be overwhelmed and be like, this is a disaster, or they love the options, or then I can put it together, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, and then I'll switch out snares, if I need to. I mean, if I need to, I have shit options here, but I don't love the idea of replacing things if I don't have to, either. Like I don't like the idea of building a whole nother tom setup unless the music really, really calls for it.
Okay.
So, I kind of have like a Ringo kit of 13 and a 16, and I have a 24-inch bass drum, and then I'll have a second snare if I need that, a different color, So that's sort of my basic setup. And then, tons of percussion and the programming thing you were talking about, having access to some of that stuff. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. It sounds like really your options are coming from the miking standpoint, and like you can go anywhere with that mic options.
Yeah, and then some of the mics
you're going to tune accordingly.
Yeah. No, I definitely tune to a track and like take a lot of thought about, like if the bass drum needs to be like really airy, I might put a bass drum in front of the bass drum and then mic that for more, but the sub kick sort of does that. And then what else is interesting about some of this is that, everybody else has a drum replacement type setup in their own thing. So, like I almost felt like it got to a point, like you were talking about sound and personality and like the radio and then like, identifiable things. It's so interesting about where we are now. Like, you can have a great drummer turn in a killer track with great sounds, but then when they mix it, they might replace everything anyway, and I'm not, when I say that, it's not like, God, these are the worst of times and everything's just a disaster. It's almost like that's just the way it is. Like I feel like I've had to like chop my brain in half or take half of it out and be just like, if we're gonna survive tracking in in this modern era, like it's just what it is, where the technology is kind of taking some of this. And if you're gonna work and try to pay the mortgage, you sort of have to be able to swim in all these different streams,
Yeah.
And to be like raising the flag of like, no, it's got to be my sound, or you can't have my tracks, or like I'll never cut with a click track because that's the death of music, or or all this kind of different shit. It's kind of like, I don't know. I surrender. I don't know what is good about anything. I just know I got trying to survive as a drummer.
Yeah.
Because like when we look back at this era of recorded music that we're a lot working in, me and you, like I don't know if it's gonna be like, man, I can't listen to anything past 1985 or whenever click tracks became prevalent, because that was the death of real people or something. And then but then I'm not even arguing that. I'm just saying I know some people think that, and then there's art to playing with a click really great and making it comfortable and making things seem like you're breathing even though you are with a click, like so. I think I'm talking in circles again.
It's funny. I had this thought recently, and we don't need to go down this road. I'll just say it and we can move on. But like with the whole AI thing, it's like I was like, oh man, maybe this is like the full circle where what we do, like including making mistakes or inconsistencies, that's actually going to be the gold, because nothing, like everything's already perfect, but everything's going to be like even more perfect, or but like the thing that maybe musicians or humanity survives on is actual mistakes.
No, but no, okay, but
the fact that you can actually capture a mistake
No, but okay, I love it. I love what you're saying. So a couple thoughts, like what is that plugin? I don't know if it's BFD or one of them where it has like, MIDI files, and then there's a lot of these programs have that quantized thing, and like there's an image of the dude with a goatee.
I don't know.
Like,
Okay.
yeah. But the idea is that his time is a little looser,
Okay.
and like you can, it's like range quantized, which I'm sure you know about.
Yeah.
So this idea, okay, so like let's say I'm with Chat GBP AI guy, right? And I don't even know how any of this works, but it's just like tripping me the shit out, So I say, give me a Blair track, and let's say that the chat bot goes even just like the raw material that you have on YouTube with all, you playing solo with all the hip shit,
Right.
and sonically creative, but then we want to mix Bernard Purdy with it, but only on the bridge of the song.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So the chat bot goes, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, man, if it like, if you feed enough like raw material into the chat bot, like say he goes through and is able to dissect, like these programs that will split all the recordings into the, so, the chat bot has all of Aretha's stuff and goes through it and is able to take all the drums out of it and analyze it, like sonically and feel what, because I remember in Downbeat magazine, they had some kind of article once where, and this was like a long time ago, where they were analyzing like Art Blakey's ride cymbal feel, and it was like somebody at MIT or something, and they were talking about like the velocity of how he was hitting and the spread of where the triplets were like
Holy shit, really? Like
okay, but at a tempo of 120, versus because that space would be different if he was at 90 beats per minute.
Yeah.
But like if the chatbot can do all that, and then let's build in like a little bit of mistakes, like you're saying, like maybe the chatbot or the AI thing can do that, like make it the goatee where the range quantized isn't perfect, but like but like the fact that Logic has these drummers where they're all named different, like they have personalities, right? Like in the program, so you can get the cat that's like the punk drummer dude, and then you have someone that's the coffee house percussionist,
Is that you?
Yeah, right. but it's just it's amazing. It's amazing world.
Yeah,
like that there's different drummers in these programs with names and personalities sort of already. Like it seems like maybe
that's the next step is build your own AI Shawn Pelton thing. And game over, bro. All you got to go is show up on Saturday night, and the rest of your week is you're chilling, right?
Well, but that's interesting about the future of playing drums and all of that in the modern world. Like, a lot of people, I think, some people will come and they ask like, man, I really want to be a session player in New York, and then it's like, it just feels like in a way, maybe that ship has sailed, like, the era of like Steve Gadd and Rick Marotta running around doing nonstop dates in New York, that's just not a reality, Yeah.
I think what I'm saying is like the visceral part of doing it live. That can't be replaced. They can put, I don't know why the fuck I'm going down this road. I think it's just in my head, like, but you could put images up there, but like like doing what we do in person, like that shit can't get replaced. Anyway, I'm gonna shift gears because fucking I don't know what's happening, man.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's it. I don't know, man. I'm just looking behind you. I'm looking at like all the shit back there. I love it. It's crazy. Yeah. What do you got going on this summer?
Man, I think just different one-off stuff. There's like sort of always stuff in town, like down at the bitter end, and this cat Osnoy's guitarist that plays a lot of town with different people, and a couple things coming up with him. I just was doing some tracking for James McCartney, which I guess that's Paul's son, here. And this guy David Kahn was producing. He was really creative producer,
How is that?
So, man, it was really interesting. It was like David's approach is always really creative and different. And he had like a sort of come up with some demos that like some of the stuff had some trap drums on it, programming. And then, you know, he's sort of really open. It's like, well, are the real drums going to replace sort of what's there, or are they going to like be there with the program? Like trying to, mind read some of that. And then, he's not always sure about, or a lot, not just him, but a lot of producers, maybe they don't know exactly what they want until they hear something, so that's kind of like, I find that's an interesting dance too, like about communicating about something like, hey, so, all right, this sounds really already pretty cool. So are the real drums going to replace the trap, or, what's there programming wise, or they're going to go with it? And then if they do, does that mean they would just be coming on the chorus, and that's when the real guy shows up and beats the shit out of everything, and it goes back to but it sometimes I find that trying to sort through that on my own can be kind of helpful, because I don't know if they know sometimes what they want, yet until they hear it. I always try to come up with this phrase, like a picture speaks 1,000 words, and like one listen through, brings a lot of clarity, or let's say, like with the dance of what we do, when you're handing in tracks to someone. And
so you were doing that on your own? You were tracking that stuff on your own?
Yeah. Like, so he would send me, stems of where he was at.
Yeah. Okay.
I think he knew he wanted live drums, but often it's not super clear on some stuff. He knows exactly what he wants, and other times it's sort of a gray area.
Yeah. That's the kind of magical rabbit hole, though, when it's super creative and you're like, ooh, I could replace some of this stuff and it would be dope. Do I go that way? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or is it like, then it can go into this other like weird world where like, okay, so this stuff is like super gridded out.
Yeah.
And if the real drums are gonna, if the programming is gonna supplement the real drums, like how deep do you go into making yourself sound like a robot?
Yeah.
And then it's about, the time and sort of the editing and the art of where stuff breathes or doesn't, and where it's totally locked with like what's happening already. And that's like a good thing, or no, they didn't want that at all. They wanted you to replace what was there, and it was supposed to sound organic. And what are you doing? You're so stupid. You made it sound like or, oh man, this is great. We didn't have to edit anything in it. It just lays perfectly with it. Oh, well, we'll do, or but I know exactly what I'm talking about.
It's so funny to hear you talk, man, because it's like, oh my God, it's like that's what my brain does. It's like the amount of options of like, it's like overload. It's like, I could do all these things, or maybe I shouldn't, or, it's like, so funny.
Yeah. And then having an instinct of like, okay, so this does sound good with the programming going with the live drums. So let's go in there and make sure there's no flams.
Yeah.
Or this is horrible and it really should be live drums, and these programmed drums are lame and they all know it's lame. And so therefore pretty obvious they're going to get rid of that.
Yeah.
Or, it's just interesting how many ways it can go.
Do you get deep with the editing, with the gridding? Or do
I do sometimes. Yeah.
Okay.
I do sometimes when I feel like it calls for it. Like that would be an interesting example. Like there were some examples where you could tell it was going to be better if it was live drums.
Mm-hmm.
And there was other things where it's like, oh man, I'm not sure that the programming sounds great with the real drums, but it's really not going to work unless the shit is tight.
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, so going through it, then, that can get really intensive with how much time you want to put into that side.
Yeah.
And, doing it on your end or letting the other people do it. And then the control issue of like, it's better to let them do it because they want to do that versus like, how the person's thinking and they actually would love it if you do it so they don't have to deal with it, or, like, where's all that at? And,
what else is interesting? And I mean, when I think about your playing, like, it's like the groove is like this, right? And then when there's a fill, to me, when I know it's you, it's like your fills have swing. And that doesn't mean the time is wacky. It's just, it's just that it swings, and that is not always great for gridding, even
Yeah,
though
right.
it's in time. But the swing, the triplet thing versus the straight 16th or whatever. I mean, so that rabbit hole could get deep. What I'm thinking, like I have that issue. Like there's some cats who play on the grid and they're fucking amazing at it, and they're that's just them, right? Um, I'm not like that. Like I'm good on the grid, but like my shit moves a little if there's some swing in there, and like that rabbit hole of either changing your playing in the moment or just kind of stylistically, like homogenizing that or whatever.
Right.
I guess what I'm saying is I there's a lot of swing in your playing, and that thing can get deep when you're trying to like grid it, right?
Yeah. No, and it's interesting, you know, what you're bringing up. Like, I guess, a lot of it depends too on, the tempo and like the degree of manipulation of like, even within like if it's something like, something like a halftime shuffle, let's say, the ability to go from like, and then or to straight eight or straight 16s, as a contrast to the against the shuffle and all that kind of stuff, like you're saying, manipulating time in that way. And then when you're going in, if you are trying to move that stuff around so it makes sense, I do think there's an art to editing,
Yeah.
and doing it musically. And but the shuffle thing is interesting. Like, I don't know, did you ever deal with the MPC quantized thing? Like, I guess they're quantized. Tell me if I'm saying this right. So there's 50, and then there's 75.
Yeah.
They're quantized, and then 66 is sort of a perfect triplet, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, like in that world of hip hop production, I guess, and I'm not an expert, but where in between 50 and 66, like the shuffle of that, and then also this really tight shuffle that's up here at 75, and then 66 is like a perfect, and then the more like spread out in between eighth and shuffle.
Like Zigaboo lived somewhere in between 60 and 66.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I remember dealing with some of that and how insightful that was. And then Stan Moore drills into that too. Like he'll take at a certain tempo and he'll play 16th notes really straight, and then he'll gradually shuffle them to show how much spread and interpretation there is.
Yeah.
With that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. We live in crazy times. I'm just circling back to like our discussion about Gadd. It's like, no one would have told Gadd back in the day, like, hey, don't do like your signature fill, right? Like that's partly why you hire Gadd. And I'm thinking about you, and like, why would you tell Shawn Pelton, like, don't do that fill where it goes, that thing that lands in time and is right there with that thing, you know what I mean? But it's just not going to work in a lot of situations these days, fuck, we're just talking in circles, but my brain is just firing off, man.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that world of the world that we're in, where the grid world, and the idea of people that see, they're reacting to the quality of something by what they're seeing on a grid sometimes versus maybe what they're hearing. And I think that's like a really interesting, we're in this era of gridded visual, sort of, with people recording at home and tracks and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's hard not to get lost, even doing it on your own. It's hard not to get lost in that. That was like a tricky lesson I had to teach myself a while back. Like,
I think there's an art to doing it, where like, what do you let go of? What do you pay attention to? What's cool and loose in a good way, and what's just not going to cut it ultimately when they start, putting. And it's fascinating.
Yeah. All right, man.
But I think we're chipping away at the world's problem. We're
Yeah, I
solving-
know. Yeah, this is good. This is good. Yeah. Just 5 more of these and we got it, man. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, dude, thanks for your time, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, man. Hey, I'm a big fan, and again, what you're doing with these podcasts, and then again, all that content that you've got up and that you've been doing. Don't stop, man. It's really inspiring. And,
Oh, thank you.
it's like a great service for all of us, man. To have
Wow.
hear what
That's nice to hear, man. Yeah. Because,
Yeah.
you know, again, you know, I just want to get out and play with people. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, I think like we all do, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, amen. Well, anyway, man, thanks so much for having me.